Welcome back to another edition of my Method of Free Associations videos on YouTube. Today I'm going to be talking about the disappearance of Brian Shaffer. Now, the 20th anniversary of his disappearance is actually coming up here pretty soon, in just a couple of weeks. And he disappeared April 1st, 2006. And we covered this in the podcast a couple years ago, and I'm going entirely by memory here. I'm not going to rehash the entire case, but I'm going to explain my theory on the matter and why I think that most of the outlandish theories about his disappearance are complete bull. And I think there's a very plausible explanation for why he disappeared, or at least how he disappeared. Now, just to give you a quick background on the matter, Brian Shaffer, he was a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University. And right before spring break, or actually it was right as spring break began at the end of the week, Brian and his friend Clint decided to go out and bar hop for a while. And the first bar they went to was the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Now, this bar, it's no longer there, but it was a bar near the campus of Ohio State University. And Clint was a friend of Brian's, and the two went out there, and once they were there, they decided, hey, let's go somewhere else. Let's go bar hop. Maybe do a shot at a bunch of different bars. And while they were out doing that, they met a mutual friend named Meredith at some other bar that I can't remember the name of. But anyway, after doing some more shots, they ended up going back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona. And the three of them were just hanging out there. You know, CCTV captured Brian, Clint, and Meredith going into the bar. Now, to get into the bar, you have to actually go up an escalator, and this escalator is covered by CCTV. So the thing that people are kind of confused about is how a guy can go into a bar and not be seen coming out of the bar, and he just goes missing forever. Now, this leads to a lot of crazy questions like, well, how could he have just gone into this bar and never come out and nobody's ever seen him again? Now, on the surface, this is a really interesting case because I don't know of any other cases like this, and it's fascinated the internet for 2 decades now because he's never been seen. No trace of him has ever been found. Nobody knows where the hell he went. Nobody knows what the hell happened to him. Now, something to consider is that while he was in this bar, he met up with these 2 girls. Now, Brian had a girlfriend, and rumor has it that he was about to propose to his girlfriend. But, you know, he was drunk, he was feeling good, and feeling flirty with one of these 2 women. And he was seen on CCTV right outside the bar, getting the number of one of them, and I believe maybe kissing her on the neck. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing. Now, I think some people say that maybe these 2 girls had something to do with it, whether directly or indirectly. I actually don't think so. I think that Brian was just making a bad decision with regards to his relationship and making a poor choice while he was drunk. And I don't know exactly how drunk he was, but he had to have been feeling pretty good. So anyway, there's also a rumor that maybe his friend Clint could have ended him because a lot of suspicion fell on him when he refused to do a polygraph test. Now, I think on the surface that does seem suspicious, but one thing you have to remember, or one thing you should know, is that Clint was also a college student. I believe he came from a well-off family, and he lawyered up, and his lawyer advised him to not take the polygraph test. Now, this in itself is not suspicious to me. I think if I were in his shoes and I were truly innocent, I would also refuse to take a polygraph test as well, because polygraph tests, they usually aren't enough to clear you, but they're enough to cast a lot of suspicion on you if you actually fail the polygraph test. So I think there's very little upside for him to take this polygraph test, and a huge potential downside. Now, anyway, back to the night in question. They were all three hanging out in the bar, and at some point later in the night, Brian, he gestures up that he's going to go up to the stage area, and this is where the band was playing. There was a band playing that night in the Ugly Tuna Saloona, and Meredith and Clint, they just sort of hang out amongst themselves, and the night goes on, and as soon as 2 a.m. is about to hit, when the bar is about to close, they look all over the bar for Brian. They can't find him, and eventually they just assume that he's gone home without them, without telling them, and maybe he's too drunk, he's having a good time, he just kind of forgets that he's with his friends, or he can't find them and just decides to leave on his own, which, some people, that happens. Now, there was some construction going on in the Ugly Tuna Saloona, or at least the general vicinity of it, and this raises the question, could he have maybe wandered into a construction site and fallen into a concrete pit, and some construction worker comes and accidentally encases him in concrete like Han Solo in Return of the Jedi, or actually no, that was Empire Strikes Back, my bad. But you get the idea. The problem with this, though, is that there was no heavy construction going on, to my knowledge. I believe there was just some remodeling going on. So I don't think that it's likely that he would have been able to fall anywhere or trap himself anywhere where he would just simply never be found again. So I find that unlikely. A lot of people cast suspicion on Clint because there are rumors that he might have had an argument with Brian at some point during the night, but there's really no detail about this so-called argument, and I don't put a whole lot of weight into this either. Let me turn around. I don't put a lot of weight into this either. So, however, I think in order to understand what happened to Brian, you have to understand who Brian was. Now, Brian was a huge rock musician fan, or a huge rock music fan, rather. He played guitar. He was a huge fan of Pearl Jam. If any of you are familiar with that band, he even had a tattoo of the little stickman figure for Pearl Jam. And going back to what I just mentioned, where he was going to motion that he was going to go up to the band and either listen to them or talk to them, and this was towards the end of the night. This makes perfect sense to me, because maybe he's drunk, he's feeling good, he's feeling friendly, maybe he wants to go meet the band, maybe shoot the shit with them, pick their brain about, music stuff. Now, this isn't me trying to cast any shade on the band, but the band swears up and down that they never saw him that night. So now I believe they were questioned just a couple nights after he had disappeared, or maybe it might have been a couple weeks, but enough time had passed that maybe they simply didn't remember meeting him. So I'm not accusing them of any wrongdoing here, but I believe that the most likely scenario for his disappearance and why he wasn't seen leaving the bar is because he took the back freight elevator exit, which was not covered by CCTV. So I believe that is the strongest scenario for what might have happened to Brian. It makes the most sense. He wasn't seen coming out of the same exit that he was seen coming into the bar at. So, with that in mind, if there's only two ways in, there's only one main public entrance / exit in the bar. However, there is a back freight elevator that was not covered by CCTV cameras. Now, I think one possible scenario here is that he's drunk, he's feeling friendly, he wants to go talk to the band. Maybe he wants to offer the band help lugging out their amps or, their equipment. And maybe they just didn't remember. Growing up as a kid, my dad was the front man of a well-known local rock band from where I'm from. And I remember being a little kid and going to his gigs. And this is kind of funny, but I remember being a little kid and going to what was then called Jack Murphy Stadium. My dad's band used to play at Jack Murphy Stadium, now known as Qualcomm Stadium. Not in the field area, but just outside as people were shuffling in for Padres games. And yeah, a lot of people would come over, watch the band, maybe want to talk to the band members after the performance. And I think that it's highly plausible that this is what happened to Brian. Is he's drunk, he's feeling friendly, he's talking to the band. Maybe he offers to help lug something, some equipment, through the back freight elevator. And whatever happens after that point is where the real mystery begins for me. Because I don't think he could have just somehow entered into the wall or fallen into a bottomless pit like some people suggest, or he got sucked into a black hole or something. That makes no sense. And he wasn't seen leaving out the front entrance either. And one thing I might have forgot to mention is that the police actually did a head count on everyone seen entering the bar and everyone seen leaving the bar. And Brian was the only person who was completely unaccounted for. Now, when it comes to the band's not going to lug giant amps and drum equipment up an escalator. They would take the back freight elevator to do that. So that suggests to me that the most likely case here is that he went out there perhaps with the band, or maybe he went out that way looking for the band and got down to street level and then walked off, and then whatever happened to him. Now, again, I want to be very clear. I am not accusing the band of any wrongdoing here. I think it's possible that maybe he actually didn't interact with them, or maybe not interact with them enough to where he would have been remembered, or maybe he went after them as they were exiting and just didn't meet up with them, but he tried to and got lost and something bad happened to him somewhere. Now, that, in my opinion, is where the mystery begins. He couldn't have exited out the front. He likely didn't end up somewhere inside of a wall, just completely stuck. I don't think he got sucked up by a UFO or, any of the ridiculous theories that a lot of people throw out online. I think a lot of people, they throw out the kitchen sink because when you say a man enters a bar and doesn't leave, it's a very clickbaity title. And I think that this case is not as, it shouldn't be as clickbaity as it is. And I think that we should kind of not lose sight of the more likely explanations for this. And I mean, aside from my explanation, maybe there are some other cleaner explanations that I'm not aware of. But when I was doing the research for this episode that we did a couple years ago on Brian Shaffer, I mean, everything pointed to him either trying to interact with the band or following them out the way that they were exiting or something like that. So anyway, if you want to learn more about the Brian Shaffer case, you can go back and listen to the episode we did on him. I believe it was episode 8 or 9. I can't remember. But anyway, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching.